Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Museums as Safe Spaces, Speaking Out and Looking Inward. This new webinar series produced by ICOM Comms, which investigates the role of communications in shaping museum culture. I'm very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to share the stage with very important and relevant speakers today. Today it is also a very special day for all of us involved in the museum community because this is an International Museum Day, which are celebrating. We are celebrating today, and the topic of this year is museums uniting a divided world. Which is a topic which is really in connection with the topic of this webinar series. And to talk about that specifically, we have to start from the ICOM's museum definition, which states that, as we know, a museum is a non-for-profit permanent institution in the service of society that researches, collects, conserves, interprets, and exhibits tangible and intangible heritage, open to the public and, of course, accessible and inclusive. Museums foster diversity and sustainability, and they operate and communicate ethically, professionally, and with the participation of communities, offering varied experiences for education, enjoyment, reflection, and knowledge sharing. The topic of equality, diversity, inclusion, and community engagement is at the core of the museum policies. And today we have the opportunity to investigate it further, and which is the contribution of strategic communication to the development of this environment, safe environment. And before starting with all the presentations of today with our speakers, I would like to thank you all the partners which are involved in this event, starting of course from ICOM Comms, which is International Committee for Communications, Marketing and Audience Engagement, that is producing this webinar series, and the partners. So we have ICOM, ICTOP, for the training of personnel, and also the Intercom for the museum management committee. Of course, we have involved also the University of Genoa with the Innovation Hub in Tourism and Heritage, developed by the University of Genoa within the Ulysses Alliance, and the work package 6 of the same alliance, Ulysses, which is focused on equality, diversity, inclusion, and community engagement. Together with also NEMO, the Network of European Museum Organizations, the Museum Communication Working Group of ICOM Italy, and Cultivia. And before going to our speakers, I like to leave the floor to Angela Celeste Taramasso, who's going to talk us about the Ulysses Work Package 6. I would like to leave the floor to her. She's a colleague here at the University of Genoa. She's the Rector Advisor for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Genoa, and she represents here the Work Package 6 of Ulysses. Thank you, Angela, for being here, and I leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Christina. First of all, thanks to invite me for this interesting meeting, because obviously museum is one of the structure organization in which culture and inclusion is fundamental. For the next slide, please. You see that the Alliance Ulysses is correlated, is formed by different work package, and all work package are more or less related to work package 6. That work package 6 is transversal. It works with the impact, it works with the project management, it works with human capital, innovation, joint research, mobility, and so on. Then is a transversal work package. It's very important, and I am really great to have the in charge of this coordination. Next slide. First of all, we started to share the glossary. Then in sales, when we speak of AI, it means that we realize some opportunity for all. And in particular, the focus for AI is to eliminate bias and discrimination based on the protected characteristic of individual or group of individuals. Other side of the work package is the community engagement, is how the university can be address social needs in partnership with their external communities. It is obvious that in Italy we have the third mission of the university, that the focus is to generate knowledge outside the academic environment for the benefit of social, cultural, and economic development of the people. Ulysses, next please, is Alliance is European Alliance, and you see here the geographic position of the different partners. And obviously, my presentation now is finished. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you are interested to evaluate, to share, to check something about the output that we produce inside of the sales SharePoint. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela. So today we are going to approach the first part of this webinar series, which is speaking out about strategic communication to promote inclusive narratives in museums. And I'm very happy to start leaving the floor to Richard Sandel, which is Professor of Museum Studies and co-director of the Research Center for Museums and Galleries at the University of Leicester. His extensive work focuses on the social roles and the human rights responsibility of cultural institutions. Thank you very much, Richard, for being with us today. I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Christina and Luis and everyone involved in this event. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And if you can share my slides, I will make a start. So, over the last 3 decades or so, museums, galleries, and heritage organisations of all kinds have shaped stories that seek to offer more equitable, social justice-oriented visions of the world, and have explored how to engage audiences around contentious, sometimes divisive, social issues. While this work has never been an entirely straightforward endeavour, in recent years, the challenges of taking this work forward have been exacerbated by an increasingly polarised environment, where museums have found themselves increasingly under attack. Here's just one example of many that you'll all know. Tate Britain's programming of a drag queen storytime event for children in 2023 resulted in a high-profile clash between far-right protesters outside the gallery who carried banners reading "Leave our kids alone" and counter-protests with signs reading "Don't let the far-right divide us" and "Trans rights now." Sadly, this is far from an isolated incident. In their study of the effects of populist politics on museums in European countries, researchers found that museum staff expressed fear and exhaustion concerning political interventions such as online attacks and hate speech, personal threats, and destruction of property at the museums in which they worked. So museums have a really important, in fact, a unique role to play in this context, and external communications is a really significant part of that. But an increasingly hostile environment is contributing to a climate of fear and self-censorship across the sector, making organisations nervous about speaking out on pressing issues of the day. In the short time I have, I just want to consider how we can navigate this difficult terrain and perhaps look at strategies we can use to speak up and speak out against forms of discrimination and prejudice that pervade all areas of public life. And I'll do this by sharing just 2 brief examples of work we're developing out of our research centre at the University of Leicester. 3 years ago, in collaboration with the National Trust, that's the UK's largest museum and heritage organisation, we developed Everywhere and Nowhere. It's a project that set out to research and present highly engaging stories linked to disabled people's lives in ways that are respectful and ethical, but importantly, we wanted to tell those stories in ways that would purposefully counter the deeply entrenched negative attitudes towards disability that pervade all areas of life. Developed with disabled collaborators, our underpinning research confirmed that connections to disability are indeed everywhere. They're threaded throughout our museums, heritage buildings and landscapes, the lives, collections and historical records attached to them. But they're also nowhere. They're often erased, hidden or misrepresented in ways that reflect ableist assumptions and attitudes from the past and from the present. Out of the many stories we researched, we identified just 10 to be included in the film, which is publicly available, and in accompanying on-site interpretation. And these were carefully selected and researched for their capacity to engage audiences and support connections between disability histories and present-day themes and concerns. Of these 10 stories, one proved to be especially contentious, and that was our telling of Henry VIII's very well researched and documented, but perhaps little known experience of disability. Our aim in the project was to stimulate and be active in shaping a national level conversation about attitudes towards disability, disability rights and disabled people. We anticipated some negative and press and public comment, but we were nevertheless taken aback by the scale of the backlash and the strength of opinion that was generated. In January 2023, the film garnered significant engagement. In its first week alone, it had been the subject of 55 stories in the press and media, with Henry VIII trending across social media platforms. Whilst right-wing media often used offensive and ableist language in their reporting, this in turn opened up opportunities for us and for numerous members of the public to draw attention to and to critique the outdated and discriminatory attitudes that their reporting revealed. So, as you can see in this tweet on X, Anne asks, when will all of this woke nonsense end? And that opens up an opportunity for the National Trust to defend their values, explain the project, and develop the conversation in ways that hopefully takes people with them. So we'd done, we'd prepared well, we had done deep research and prior thinking, and we had plans in place to deal with anticipated negative reactions. But situations like this are really challenging. They're really uncomfortable. I'm sure many of you have experienced some of this. They take a huge toll on individuals and organisations. They can be emotionally draining for everyone involved. And museums are typically risk averse and cautious. So any prospect of complaints from visitors or nervous governing bodies or public protests, all of this contribute to situations where museum leaders might choose to withdraw or dilute or tone down their commitments to equity, inclusion and social justice. In the UK in 2023, we noted the unfolding of what a colleague, Richard Watts, referred to as a social justice emergency, increasing hostility towards trans people in all walks of life. This was reflected in government statistics you can see here, which showed that the number of hate crimes against trans people more than doubled in that year. And across the UK, museums were uncertain how to proceed and anxious about a backlash in the context of culture wars, where debate surrounding trans rights is often distorted by misinformed, highly charged and polarised viewpoints. As Richard Watts from People Make It Work noted, Richard said, "We were consistently witnessing leaders who lacked clarity, confidence, and actionable insight in the arena of trans rights, who were feeling anxious, uncertain, and passive in their responses. They were muting themselves from public realms and taking only small steps that could remain hidden and were unlikely to need publicly defending." It was in this challenging context that we drew together a team of legal scholars and experts with lived and learned expertise in trans inclusion. And we worked unusually quickly at pace over a period of just 5 months to develop comprehensive guidance for the sector on trans inclusive thinking and practice. And importantly, that guidance was backed by more than 20 sector support organisations that you can see here. Since the launch, we've experienced wildly misleading and inaccurate news reporting. We've received a barrage of abusive social media comments. We've had people contacting our supporter organisations and the university, tagging them online with claims that our guidance is flawed, unlawful, and high risk. We've found ourselves navigating a highly dynamic and contested legal landscape here in the UK. Our work has been subject to 3 threats of legal action since August last year. And in each case, the university has commissioned legal counsel who have advised us our work is lawful, and we've responded to the legal threats, making it clear that the guidance will not be withdrawn. The challenges continue, but we are excited and heartened by the sector response and the public response. Over 10,000 practitioners have accessed the guidance and are using it to support them to take trans inclusion work forward. We've worked with NEMO, Network of European Museum Organisations. It's great to see Rebecca join us today to support their incredible work on policy work on LGBT inclusion. And our guidance has also been adapted and translated for the Italian context by colleagues at ICOM Italy, further extending the project's reach and impact. So just my last slide. I realise I'm out of time, but I want to just briefly conclude with just some of the learning that we've taken from across these and other projects. Organisational preparedness is key. Anticipating and having strategies and approaches in place, ensuring that everyone across the organisation is on the same page and knows why the work you're doing is being taken forward. There's power in building alliances and partnerships. The work we do in museums is not so much about our own personal values, but it's our institutional and sector-wide values, the kinds of values that Christina opened with in ICOM's definition, and it's activating those in a really collective and powerful way that can help in these situations. There's real power in telling human stories that are affirming for communities who experience prejudice, but at the same time are enriching for all visitors, human stories that can bridge different communities and bring people together. And lastly, it's important to make space for respectful dialogue. We're not here to tell people how to think, and enabling people to share their views respectfully is a powerful way to move people's thinking and learning forward. But at the same time, it's really important that we defend our organisational values and why this work matters and is so important. Thank you very much. Back to you, Christina.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. Really inspiring. And we will talk about all these inspirations later on with the open discussion. And right now, I'm going to leave the floor to our second speaker, which is Sandro here. Welcome, Sandro. Very happy to have you here. He is a museum thinker, academic, and advisor based in Malta. And he is also executive board member of NEMO, the Network of European Museum Organization. But I'm happy to share with all of us that he is also bringing over 25 years of experience, hands-on experience, and she bridges theory and international practice. So we are very happy to have you here, and I leave the floor to you and for your consideration. Thank you very much, Sandro.
Thank you, Christina. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. So I would like to share a few thoughts today on what I consider to be a museum language of inclusion, a way of communicating and promoting a museum that is relevant to the now, a museum literacy of sorts. And I would like to do that with my practice as my point of departure from where I stand here in the Mediterranean. And that brings me to my first point. And my first reflection is about the museum idea and how that is understood in different contexts. Museums, in the plural, given that the rich ecosystem includes a broad range of museum typologies, let alone variants, from the Universal Museum to the National Museum idea, about which Simon Nell has written extensively, to the community-led museums of South America, guided by socio-museological principles, where curatorial authority is of relatively little relevance in the sense of how we understand it in Europe, and as tradition has framed it. In between all these, there is a vast range of diversity in what constitutes a museum and museum practice. And yet, most conversations around communication and access are built around and referenced by high-profile institutions. Scaling them down is more often an intellectual rather than a technical exercise. What I would like to say here is that most pressing questions facing museums about communication, about inclusion, about trust, look very different when your institution has 3 staff members, a contested post-colonial identity, and a politically sensitive funding environment. To a certain extent, inclusion is easier in the case of community museums, and there are noteworthy examples just about anywhere. But the situation is much more complex than that. My second point is about where museums stand on such principles, be it the well-funded museum or the local museum with limited resources. There is no neutral museums, we know it. There is no neutral object label, no neutral hanging, no neutral silence. Every choice a museum makes, what it displays, what it stores, whose story it tells, whose it omits, that in itself is a position. The question is not whether museums take positions. The question is whether they take them consciously, honestly, and with accountability to the communities they serve. In the case of the smaller institutions, by far the vast majority, for example, of the museum ecosystem and internationally as well, the urge is oftentimes that of emulating the stereotypical, that is oftentimes the well-funded, rather than building bottom-up from the context upwards, addressing specific community needs. In the region from where I come, the Mediterranean, deep sedimentation is oftentimes informed by a complex amalgam of religion and politics that is also culturally embedded in museum practice. Acknowledging one at the expense of the rest would be limiting, certainly not honest. My third point is about who runs museums. Inclusive narratives about polyphonic storytelling and representation of diverse communities continue to be discussed and debated extensively, so I would add. But they rest on a foundation that we oftentimes don't examine as much as we need to in public. The internal culture of the institution itself, workplace toxicity, systemic inequalities, political interference in curatorial decisions. These are not separate issues from our communication strategies. They are the precondition of those. Studies suggest, both in the US and in Europe, that this is widespread. And I'd like to quote the political barometer here, published by NEMO in 2022, 2024, which references staff and well-being as the direct outcome of self-censorship, which is the dominant response to political pressure, rather than open resistance, and political pressure itself that operates primarily through budget and programming, not overt censorship. If a museum staff is silenced, if junior curators from minority backgrounds are systematically overlooked, if leadership is structurally accountable to political sponsors rather than to communities, then the inclusive exhibition is, at some level, a performance with little relevance and relatively no substance. So, with this framing in mind, we might perhaps then ask the question, what does ethical and inclusive institutional communication actually look like? And here I choose to reflect on three metaphors to explain my thoughts. The first is the orchestra metaphor. Museum leadership as orchestra conductor. A conductor does not play every instrument, does not need to be the loudest voice in the room. And the role of conductors is to hold the whole ensemble together, to listen, to balance, to know when to let a particular voice carry the melody and when to draw it back. Museum directors and museum leadership make choices about whose voice is amplified, and they remain accountable to those voices. I can here mention a good example out of very many in the personality of Looney Bunch, founding director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, known as the Smithsonian, who is often cited as someone who assembled a highly contested, politically charged collection while holding an extraordinarily diverse team and community coalition together. There are obviously many others. Then my second metaphor is the living room. The museum as living room. A living room is a place where families gather. It is a safe space for familiarity to unfold and meaningful conversations to happen. And for that matter, the living room is a safe space. For us in the Mediterranean, the equivalent would be the piazza, the cafe, the street corner where neighbors argue and reconcile and tell each other stories. A place where people come in, feel at home, and have a conversation. That image reframes, in my opinion, the entire communication challenge. It is not about reaching audiences. It is about earning the right to be in the room with them. And that right is earned slowly, gradually, through sustained relationships, not just campaigns. I can mention here, for example, the Anchorage Museum's project, Seed Lab, which is the museum's sitting room, in a sense, conceived as a space for communities to converge and an entry point for the conversations incubated and conceived, conceptualized within this space to inform the museum's project. My third metaphor is the octopus museum. Octopuses are known to be highly intelligent creatures that can easily adapt to circumstances. They can take the shape and form of just about anything, driven by the specific need to adapt to circumstances. The equivalent to this would be the agile museum. And if meaningful communication is the name of the game to foster inclusivity and inclusion, then the form and shape that it takes matters little, very little, relatively little. Museum practice can move from podcast to newsletter to exhibition, much like an octopus taking the shape and form of this space it seeks to position itself within. This, I feel, is the challenge that shall inform museum futures as relevance increasingly becomes situated beyond the museum space. Already it is there. Already we are there, in fact. So, in short, can museums unite a divided world? They certainly have an obligation, I would answer, to contribute to such a quest. but I think how they try matters enormously. Museums have a unique capacity to hold complexity, to say, this history is painful and it is ours. To also say, these stories contradict each other, yet both are true. That is the museum of the future I believe in, not the museum that has all the answers, but the museum that is honest enough to hold the questions. And I stop there. Hopefully we'll pick up some of the ideas in our conversations and in your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandro, for sharing your thoughts and for the suggestions and the metaphors that you were suggesting. So as you told us, we are going to open the discussion later about these topics. So in the meantime, I like to introduce our third speaker, which is Rebecca. And Rebecca, she is, of course, the communications officer at NEMO, the Network of European Museum Organizations. But she is particularly here, and thank you for being here, to talk about a particular case study, the LGBTQIA+ inclusion in European museums, an incomplete guideline. So I like to leave the floor to her and to give us some information and details about this very interesting project. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for being here.
Thank you, Christina, for having me. It's really my pleasure to be here. I have prepared a presentation, which I'm now seeing. Thanks for that. So I was going to introduce myself. I already got a lovely introduction. So it's really my pleasure to be here to share this case study, to add to the discussions and presentations that we already heard. And not only am I happy to share this guideline, because I think it's great, but also diversity and inclusion are topics that are really dear to me. So it's really my pleasure to be here today. And in case you do not know NEMO since before, I would just like to share a few words. So NEMO was founded in 1992 at the same time as the European Union was established. And NEMO was established with the aim of uniting the needs of museums at the European level and to have a unified voice for all museums in Europe. And this is something we still do through various advocacy actions. And we also organize trainings, produce resources and information and so on. And we also have we have one main event of the year, which is our annual conference. And I'll just show a little slide there with the banner. And it would be really nice to see you there in Vilnius from the 11th to 13th of October, when we will be exploring AI, cybersecurity, and the civic responsibility of museums. That's it for now. And I welcome you to visit our website if you would like more information. But today, of course, I'm here to contribute to the excellent presentations with a case study. So in 2024, NEMO commissioned Arend Bohn to research and write a guideline on queer inclusion in European museums. It was published in November 2024 and has since then been highlighted in various conferences and meetings. And as far as we know, it's been very well received and also needed in a time marked by uncertainty due to right-wing tendencies and conservative trends, which Richard touched upon briefly. And we also see this in the whole European context and not only the UK. So why did NEMO decide to work with queer inclusion? Well, for the overall picture of where we got started and where we position ourselves, and at NEMO we find that as cultural institutions committed to learning, critical reflection, and community engagement, that museums have a profound responsibility to ensure that their spaces are welcoming and representative for all people, and that of course includes both visitors and staff. And by embracing the diversity in our communities and taking concrete steps to ensure that individuals are seen, heard, and respected, museums can strengthen their role as trusted spaces for dialogue, learning, and social equity. And we think this also helps museums to remain relevant. So that's it for the overall picture. And then to zoom in a bit, then back in 2024, we were able to give this topic more attention, since our annual focus was set on the social value of museums in terms of inclusion, equity, and diversity. And to narrow down this very big topic, we decided to focus on the LGBTQI+ community. And I will tell you a bit more about that, but it's also really nice to share the stage here and space with Richard, since he got in touch with us about endorsing the trans-inclusive guidelines, which we shared, but we also highlighted it in a NEMO webinar that you can find on our website. But we also felt that we wanted to produce our own resource, so we were quite inspired, because we wanted to give this important topic even more weight and adapt it to the European context, and to be part of positioning museums as safer spaces for diverse communities. And we find that when museums take steps to create more welcoming spaces for one community, it often leads to enhanced inclusion for all. So that's why we decided to create this guideline for the queer community. And when we made that decision, we hope not only to help one marginalized group, but to some extent everyone. And then you might wonder why we decided to focus on the queer community and not another group. Well, overall, the queer community is one of the most vulnerable groups in society and one of the first to be under attack, which is, for instance, confirmed by the European Commission's equality strategy. And we had also noticed in the last years how right-wing tendencies have created fear and unease in in museums across Europe, when it comes to queer representation and inclusion. So that overall tendency and everything else going on, and how we envision museums to act in this diverse society that we have, together with our 2024 focus, made us decide that we wanted to be part of supporting museums in navigating challenges that may arise when dealing with queer inclusion. And as we mentioned in the introduction of the guideline, symbols of queer inclusion can spark a range of reactions. For some, they will create this feeling of being seen and represented, and it can be quite empowering. Others will feel that it's just performative and it's not going to lead to any real long-term commitment for their community. And some might feel uncomfortable, even get angry, because they don't think museums should deal with such political topics and would prefer if museums remain neutral. So as you can imagine, that's a lot of different things to take into consideration, and all kinds of different responses, which can lead to quite complex dilemmas. So at NEMO, we wanted to help museums to navigate these challenges thoughtfully and responsibly with the help of an ethical guideline on queer inclusion, so that they had some kind of framework and toolkits, let's say, to fall back on when they might face a situation that's difficult in different aspects. And this is where this is a picture of Arendt, who did the research for us when he presented it at our conference in Romania, and the NEMO European Museum Conference, Can We Talk? Museums Facing Polarization. And we wanted this guideline to be more practical than some of the other reports that we have produced. So next to an overview of various policies that are relevant from the EU level and also some national examples, it also features 10 scenarios with dilemmas and recommendations for best practices. And these are based on interviews with 10 museum professionals representing various fields and countries, and they were very in-depth interviews. And you can see the outcome of those interviews in the 10 different scenarios. So they are personal but not personalized. And then there's the final chapter that offers some concrete ethical recommendations for various scenarios that could happen. So that was the main resource that we published, but we didn't want to stop there at this launch. So a few months later, we produced and published a 4-pager with only the ethical guidelines to make it even more accessible for a quick overview of how museums could act in various scenarios. And it's hopefully something that they can use to get empowered to advance queer inclusion. And I like to regularly share and link to our guideline and the webinar we did with Richard and his lovely colleagues on trans inclusion, as well as other resources whenever I have a moment. For instance, I did so yesterday on the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Intersexism, and Transphobia. And our impression is that this guideline has been very well received, and that museum professionals needed a document like this in the current political climate, which, although there might not be direct laws prohibiting queer inclusion initiatives in museums, there's this fear and unease that can make museums not sure what to do and decide to skip the topic altogether. So we're really hoping that this guideline and the fact that Nemo is talking about it and encouraging, let's say, inclusion and diversity actions, that it will help to create a more safe and welcoming museum space. And we also know that there's a need to keep the conversation going and that people want to dive deeper, since we've been invited to conferences and workshops. And the images you see here are from the Queer in the Museum conference in Bologna last year, where we presented the guideline and also delivered a workshop on working through dilemmas that might occur when striving for inclusion. And last week, we delivered a similar workshop for German museum professionals at the annual conference of the German Museums Association. And on that topic, I can also share that the guideline is being translated into German, and also that the researcher Arend Bond, who wrote our guideline, also contributed with a chapter to an Italian book by Nicole Molhusen, who's part of the ICOM Italy working group on inclusion and diversity. And this chapter is based on the guideline. So it's really developing and moving forward in all kinds of ways, which is very exciting. And this is not an exciting slide though, but I wanted to include one graph of the download history of the guideline. So obviously you can see when we published it, there was a lot of downloads, and then there was another peak in January when we launched the 4-pager ethical guideline. And then you can see that there's a download all throughout the year. So you can see there's a steady interest throughout the year. And it's actually the second most downloaded resource on Nemo's website since it was published, which also can be seen as an indicator that it's interesting and needed by museum professionals. And in total, I believe it has around 900 downloads. And to ensure the continued coverage by Nemo on the topic, we have launched a webpage for diversity inclusion and also well-being, but we also have a news tag, so we make sure to regularly report on various topics and themes connected to diversity and inclusion, because we didn't want this guideline to be a one-off action, but rather we want to continuously strive towards contributing to a museum sector that is inclusive to all. And we also try to practice what we preach. So for instance, we do put up inclusive bathroom signs at our conferences. And since I'm among peers with other communications officers and so on, and this is a case study presentation, I figured I could actually share something, not only share successful parts about all of this, but also mention opportunity for improvement. In other words, something that failed. So in the guideline, we included 2 calls for actions, since we have had a lot of positive experiences with community sourcing in the past. For instance, we have this map of climate-related actions in museums. And also we call this very guideline incomplete, since we do not sit on the whole truth for all experiences, and therefore we wanted to give the community the possibility of contributing to the resource and let it grow over time. However, these calls really didn't generate any kind of submissions or feedback, and eventually we removed the section that we had planned from the website for this community sourcing. And I don't really know why this didn't work out. Perhaps it was too personal or bothersome to submit the information. Perhaps readers did not see the point in sharing their perspectives. We won't really know. And if time allows, I hope at some point to look into it a bit further. But for sure, we learned something for the future. And that's all for now. I hope I didn't overstep my time limit. And I look forward to questions, and you could always get in touch per email if you would like. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for the presentation. I see that, of course, it is a non-static, it is an ongoing process. So also from the definition Nemo gave to the guideline, I think this is the first communication point that we have to address, of course. So we are now here for the open discussion. I like to thank you very much, our speakers, and for their suggestions, inspiration, and the food for thoughts that you're sharing today. As I see, it is a sensitive topic, strictly related to the reputation, ethics, and the core of the museum. So it is something that that is going to underline the transversal asset of communication within museums, and also the fact that communication needs to work strictly in connection with the governance of the museum to address this topic. To open the discussion, I would like to introduce our special guest of today, which will help us in focusing on this topic, which is Darko Babic, and he is the chair of the ICOM International Committee for the Training of Personnel. So I think your contribution today is really relevant for the topic, because I like to start the open discussion asking to you, what do you think? As we are talking about theoretical guidelines, how can we move from there to actual workforce capacity? I mean, it is something that probably is not that easy to approach, but I like to ask you to share your thoughts about the topic.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot. I'm so glad that I'm part of this webinar. And I would like first to thank the presenter, which was very inspiring. And going to your question, if I have solution for that, then I will apply that to my students. It's not easy, of course. It's not easy, and I think that as far as we are discussing, how to apply things in practical way, of course, we will speak about museum practice and implementing things within the museum practice as much as possible. Museum is, of course, behind the museum and how museum operates. There is a theory, but in general, they are practice. So implementing that, which could be different kind of the scale, everything which was mentioned, is some way of how you're supposed to do it. The one thing which from training committee, my committee, actually we do consider, and what we are discussing here is, of course, the approach which we are saying that there is no one way how to do it. Not only because at the beginning, the situation, for example, in different parts of the world are different. Just to give you one example, of course, few years ago, we have the question from the Asia, Southeast Asia, about the burning issue for them regarding museum, and that was collection management. So when you think about Europe, of course, the topic of collection management is quite clear, or more or less quite clear, but the most urgent thing for them was that. In South America could be something else. In Africa could be something else. So what we are insisting within the training, the ICOM training committee, is that regional approach. So just to check, for even this kind of the topic in Canada could be discussing about First Nation people, or again, in some other part, something else. So understanding the local or regional or even more local context is the uttermost priority. Only after that, if we are speaking about the entire world, only after that, you're supposed to find and understand what kind of approach, and after that, what kind of the training is the best thing which could assist museum workers there. So this is something we are always insisting. And after the training or through the training, the best way, of course, is to have combination of the practical training. So combining with a workshop, of course, not always easy to do, but doing that, at least some parts of the training as kind of the practical work, is, I think, from the training perspective, the best way how to go on.
Okay. One of the thank you very much, Darko. In fact, listening to all of you and all the inspirations we are sharing today, one of the questions could be if a universal approach is possible. I mean, because of what you're sharing. And another thing is that as we are approaching a sensitive topic, where reputation is, and ethics is the core, we have maybe to think about someone that's able to manage reputation as a reputation strategist. Someone in literature also have been speaking about that. But I would have a question that would be how to mitigate the possible accusation of being political approaching these topics to the institutional integrity that a museum has to sustain and support. What do you think about that? Would you like to share some ideas about that? I don't know, Richard maybe, or someone of you?
We're really happy to start, Christina. I think it's such a good question. Literally just last week, we work across, we do collaborative action research with lots of different cultural organisations, and one that we're working with had asked us to think through, because they were noting increasing kind of challenges around that question, different stakeholders questioning what's political and how to navigate that. And we were reflecting on that being a very predominant theme, but one that never goes away. We explored that, a decade ago when we were first doing some LGBTQ inclusion work with the National Trust, right up to date now. That never seems to go away. And I guess, as Sandra was talking about, we know that museums are not and can never be neutral. So culture is always political. And at the same time, we have to find ways to have strong relationships with all our different stakeholders, people who hold different views and so on. For me, then it comes down to organizational values again, and seeing those really, that to stand for inclusion, equity, and so on is not kind of capital P political. It's values that we should all be able to sign up to and agree. And then how we do that is all in the kind of art of doing that well and taking as many people with us on that journey.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Richard. Of course, I have something to ask also about a suggestion that Sandro put on the floor, which is, of course, there are no neutral museums, and we have to deal with expectation and practicalities, of course, and we have to focus on community needs. So maybe the importance of being a strategic approach is dealing also with this. So we have to understand the different segments of our audience and to understand their needs, and then develop a strategy of community engagement. So what do you think about that, Sandro? What do you agree? What do you think about that?
Previously, Richard referred to the skills and the know-how on as to how to deal with these as an art. I have another word for that, and I think that would be diplomacy. And I think diplomacy is the skill that museums need most in this particular moment in time. It's how you act, and when necessary, being an activist, but the action comes first, and the purpose and the objective sometimes can be reached without going beyond and if necessary, obviously, I'm not saying that activism, that museum activism sometimes, and more often than not it is the case, is necessary, but with diplomacy perhaps we can manage to reach our ambition, our objectives, obviously speaking on behalf of our communities for which museums stand. And I think that is a possible way how we can frame all this, because at the end of the day, there is relevance, and relevance is not something that comes and goes. This is something that you need to build in a very sustained manner over time. And at this point in time, in particular geographies around the world, we risk that sustainability, that resilience, that relevance, which is under pressure from a political context that is becoming much more divisive. And we're living in particular times. I want to be positive in my choice of words here, but I think going back, diplomacy is perhaps the right tool, or perhaps one of the most important tools that museums can have in their hands to act. I don't know what you think about this, Darko.
No, I agree. I agree. Although sometimes the word diplomacy, could be understood differently. Yes, sometimes, sometimes the people do have, some people do have kind of the feeling that diplomacy is actually doing nothing, or avoiding to do something. But I agree. And Christina, to your question, of course, needs are the words we are easily use, and we all say, okay, we're supposed to know the needs of local community, but it's again difference in between needs, which we will recognize or not necessarily recognize, and wishes. So they are not the same. So how to balance in between, what is real need of the local community, and will we recognize all that needs and imply that for a benefit of the local community, or we will, select some of them, which I think quite often happens. Regarding not only museums, regarding all organization, institution, and so on. So it's sometimes I'm using the same word actually in my texts, but sometimes it's really supposed to be precise about that and how we detect needs and how we then approach to that needs and what we are doing in practice to satisfy that needs of the local community. And they are, of course, they are not always, they are not unique. So you have even small local communities, but the needs will not be unique.
Yes, thank you very much, Sandora and Darko, for your comments. And you're giving me the opportunity to approach this topic, because, of course, as we have been sharing, communication is a complex process, which is managing complexity, and you have to start from the analysis and understanding of needs that are different from expectations of your audiences, of your audience, of the different target of your you decide to approach. Then you can define your strategy with all the points that you have to put into, from the resources to the channels to all the things you have to define. And then you have to define also the KPI, and then you have to check during your process if you are reaching your goals or not. And of course, you have to optimize the process if you're not reaching them. And so I would take this opportunity to ask Rebecca for your case study, if this was applied, of course, to the case study you are presenting today, and if there are any suggestions or reflections that you would like to share with us.
Well, when it comes to the bigger goal, let's say, of supporting museums and becoming more inclusive and safe places, then of course that's a need that we had noticed from the community, if perhaps not in a survey of such, but just as Richard was also talking about, this fear that and unease that we can sense across not only in the museum context, but also in all of society, that there was a need for something tangible to be able to hold on to, although we haven't printed it, but to go online to see that there is some guidance in the topic, and considering how well received it's been, and the fact that we get to talk at events like these and other conferences and workshops, then the need is still there, and we will continue talking about it. That's for the overall picture, I guess.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
And I could also add, maybe when we talk about these sensitive topics and how we may deal with them and approach them, it's quite easy to be overpowered by the negative voices, but usually they're not the majority. We have a very big silent majority that is agreeing with what museums are doing in various contexts and topics. And they just don't speak up to the same extent and volume as those who are negative, and might even gather up to do campaigns, like hate campaigns. So there's usually there are more people in favor of what you're doing for the community, even if it's a group in the audience and community that you might not feel that you belong to, then like there are still a lot of supporters there. We should not forget that.
Yes, for sure, because it's sort of active listening, I would say, to the people. So I'm sure it is well appreciated. So thank you, Rebecca, for sharing this among us. Okay, I don't know if there are any questions from our participants that you like to address, or you have any further thoughts you would like to share, because we are here to address the topic. So it is a very good opportunity to think about that. I mean, what can be the next concrete steps that we can do to support this development of these inclusive narratives within museums? Do you have any suggestions? I mean, for giving some instructions or directions to our colleagues worldwide? Any of you would like to add anything about the topic? I see from the comments here that, of course, someone is telling us that, of course, that the diplomacy, the topic approached by Sandro, is a topic that's also interesting and important to approach. I think that, of course, we have to find out the places of discussion for approaching these topics, and how we can contribute to development of that. And you have been sharing many interesting insights and thoughts that I think it can be really inspiration for many of us. Would you like to add something else, Richard, about a particular thought about what you are sharing today, with the opportunity of being all together?
Sure. Just to sort of say so I was really intrigued and pleased when you asked me to be involved, because I'm seeing across the work that we do, communications, marketing teams in the best organizations getting much, much closer to this work, and being, it's perhaps in the past in less progressive organizations, communications has been somewhat kind of bolted on, and yet you have, comms has such a unique role and to play in that, really extending the reach of those values beyond people who visit, so many people know about, for example, our Everywhere and Nowhere project, who didn't visit the actual museums and heritage sites where some of that film was screened, because we were, harnessing comms in the wider public realm. And so just such a really important, unique role to think about how professionals in this area can live and breathe and extend those organizational values to be really active in that wider public realm. I think that's the real growing trend, which I'm being very heartened by. As someone who used to be, I started off my career as a marketing officer in our local museum. So I've kind of always had a very soft spot for that kind of work, really.
Please, Sandro, please.
Yes, I'd like to add on to what Rebecca has been sharing. This silent majority, or this silent community that supports museums, and I see that as something hopeful. And I'd like to share a personal experience of mine, which comes from my work with the Anchorage Museum in Anchorage, Alaska, where I've been working with colleagues there on podcasts, and we've been in conversation with museum directors and museum professionals from all over the world. And the one word that cuts across all our conversations is hope. There is a sense of hope that in spite of all that we're living, in spite of the challenges to communicate ethically and responsibly, and yet speak on behalf of our communities and all the challenges that come with that, there is hope, and people are hopeful. And so we need to look beyond and build on our strengths, because there are strengths and there are possibilities that we can engage with.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Sandro, for sharing that. And of course, hope is really a strong word, which is taken with very strong commitment, and also a sort of vision of the future. And so I think that if museums can support the development of a sense of hope in the audience, I think in a better framework, an environment, I think we have reached the goal. I mean, we cannot solve everything in a minute, but we can look at the direction, which is that, and I'm sure that this silent community has shared that is supporting this process. So I don't know, Angela, would you like to add something, please?
Only one comment. In my opinion, my experience, one of the guidelines of the diplomacy is the hope, because otherwise the diplomacy doesn't exist. And if you don't know the needs of the population, of the people that you are involved in this museum or in other activity, it is very difficult that your activity on diplomacy and hope can arrive at the goal, arrive at success of this. First of all, hope and diplomacy in parallel, and second step is to know exactly the needs, but as Darko indicates, essential needs, but always with the main focus on increase the culture, that consider that the culture avoid the discrimination, and obviously inclusion to all. Very nice the image that Rebecca present, includes to all. That usually I present at my students, because frequently we speak only about inclusion because the gender or disability. No, all. This is very important. Thank you very much, because it was really interesting afternoon today. I have a problem with my doof, but don't worry.
Thank you very much, Angela, for sharing. I'm very happy of the discussion today and the contribute of our speakers. Really, I think it is a very inspiring session. And of course, this is just one side. I mean, in our next webinar, we are going to approach also the other side of of the framework. And I think that museums can be, and it's very, I would say, it's very important to say it loud today, which is the International Museum Day, can be really active actors in defining these process and goals of inclusion and equality and diversity and community engagement in this sense. So if we are going to speak about community engagement, we have to speak about ethics, we have to speak about reputation, and also the goal of reaching all the different needs of the visitors of the museums. We have to start from there. We have to start in have an open discussion on the topic, and we try to develop this sort of network of competencies that can work together to define the topic. And thank you. We have some comments from the chat. We have really to start from here. So I thank you so much for being here and to be part of the discussion of today. I don't know if there are any other questions from our audience here, from the participants that are online at the moment. Because of course we are at the end of our event today, and so thank you very much. And of course the project of these museums as safe spaces is going on. We already set the next webinar, which is this one. Of course, we are going to have the session about looking inward, strategic communication to address inconvenient truth within museums. And it will be on Tuesday, 23rd of June, at the same time here on the channel of ICOMCOM's channels. And we are going to keep you informed about that. And with the participation of François Mérès, Liz Levin, and Mia Locks from the MMF Museum Moving Forward, and Jessica Rivera. So it will be another very interesting session on the other side of the topic, but we are also thinking about developing the topic, reaching also other colleagues worldwide. We love to have the participation of many colleagues from the whole world, talking about the regional issues, as we shared before. So each region and each country maybe has some different issues that has to address. So it will be a really interesting place to discuss, opportunity to discuss all together, and maybe to find out some insights that can show us how to proceed for the next steps in this direction. So if there are not any further questions from our audience, I would like to thank you so much, all of you, for being here today. It has been a really inspiring session. I would like really to thank you, all of you, the speakers, our chair, and Angela from the University of Genoa and Ulysseus, and all the people who's following us today. Okay, of course, Luis is. This is also the opportunity to talk about the next activities of our committee, like our annual conference in Finland. You'll find out all the information on our website and social networks. And thank you for being here. Don't forget to follow us and to be part of our next webinar on June, and follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all the channels we have. And thank you for being here, really.